This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt PureTube microphone through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show, and there's some great deals waiting for you there. Now get ready to rock.
I go wild with optionitis if we record everything sterile and then do everything in mix, because when the artist comes in to listen to it, it sounds like dog shit. And you're like, just use your imagination. That's not fun. They can do that at home. Why are you coming into a studio to record everything super clean and not have any character or even a balance for that matter? And I found early on that that's more like work to me, and it's not fun and it's not creative.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio's S-Series, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors featuring 5 models, from the compact S2V all the way up to the powerful S5H. The range builds on Atom Audio's iconic heritage with new technology for improved acoustic performance. With new woofers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine, the S-Series ensures accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail, and a forward-looking digital connectivity. Backed by a 5-year guarantee, Atom Audio monitors embody durability and professional sound for your studio at atomaudio.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Brandon Highfill, head engineer at Schematic Studios and owner of Eastside Music Supply here in Nashville, Tennessee. Originally from Jacksonville, Florida, Brandon moved here in 2009 and with his friend and bandmate Blair started Eastside Music Supply in 2014. Brandon played guitar in bands since high school and was always fascinated with the recording process, but didn't really catch the bug until he set out to build a practice space for himself in 2016, which morphed into a full-blown studio as he became obsessed with making the room sound good and building it right the first time. This quickly led to sell more than half of his pedal collection, to invest in a small handful of microphones, an interface, his first analog mixer, and a Tascam 388 tape machine. And I guess a little mixer combo, right? Yeah. Brandon was hooked, and gone were the days of making music in his bedroom, as it became less about recording his own music and more about recording anything at all. Quote, I just wanted to practice, and it became like a drug, honestly, quote. So please welcome Brandon Highfill to Recording Studio Rockstars. Brandon, my friend, are you ready to rock, dude?
Let's rock.
All right. Glad to have you here, dude. So, you know, I'd forgotten that Eastside Music Supply was your store when I was prepping for this, and I saw that in your intro.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember how we met, too. Do you remember when we first met?
Yeah, I mean, shortly after I moved to Nashville in 2009, I came with, just me you know, a collection of pedals and guitars and amps. And I had, you know, stuff that I'd never seen Craigslist like Nashville's Craigslist, you know. Coming from Jacksonville, Florida, there wasn't a lot. It was slim pickings, you know. So when I got here, I noticed how much stuff was available in this city, and I was just overwhelmed. And I think you were one of the first transactions on Craigslist, basically. So I came here with a Fender blender that's sitting right on the table in front of me now, and you had a Casio SK1, and I used to have a Yamaha VSS30, which is similar to the SK1 for sampling voice and manipulating it, but it was broken. So the SK1 was the closest thing I could find, and you had one. So we did a little tradesies, and I came over here and checked out the toy box, and this is my first time back since. And
that's awesome. So I traded one of my, I think I used to have two SK1s.
Mm-hmm.
So Rockstars, if you're not familiar with it, that's like an old school battery powered keyboard.
Yeah.
Just like some great classic sounds in it. Like it's got the dog bark in it. Sometimes you hear the dog barking melody.
Some
but
ridiculous.
You could sample your voice too.
Yeah, that was my thing.
Yeah. And I think I had a couple of them. So finally one day I was like, why don't I get rid of one of these and get something else? But the Fender blender is a cool fuzz pedal too.
Yeah, and it's funny timing because, you know, they just came out with the Shields blender now too, which is, you know, the Kevin Shields version.
See, you're an expert on pedals, right? Because that's one of the things I always notice about Eastside Music Supply. And again, Rockstars, that's a music store that opened up right down the street from me here in East Nashville. And I remember when it first appeared, I was like, oh shit, this is cool, man. There's a music store going right into my neighborhood. You know?
Yeah. Our old location was in the shops on Fatherland. It was 400 square feet retail. And then we eventually had to get the 400 square foot unit above the retail store for our repair shop as well. And then, you know, that we outgrew that after the first year and a half, 2 years. And that was 2014. So 2016, we moved to our Gallatin and Trinity location where we've been ever since. And it all started with pedals. I mean, that's kind of that was our bread and butter, and it still is for the most part. We want to be like the pedal store, you know, in this region, and, you know, eventually the country, hopefully. We'll see.
That's pretty cool.
We have hundreds and hundreds.
Yeah, when you walk in, there's just a wall of guitar pedals.
Yeah, that's what people know us for, so we got to lean into it.
So I don't think I've taken advantage of that enough, to be honest. And I'm sort of like
3 minutes
rediscovering
from your studio.
Well, I'm sort of like rediscovering guitar pedals again.
Yeah,
playing a lot more guitar, but I think it would probably be pretty awesome to be able to walk in and play. So if Guitar Center always had that, you know, the guy who just plays like what's your version of that as like a pedal centric local music store?
I mean, we get everybody you can imagine. I need to be selective with my words here.
Don't call anybody out.
No. I'm gonna be gentle.
But I mean, like with pedals, you want to be able to like really make wacky sounds.
Absolutely,
and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, and you know, we sell all sorts of. You know, we sell every type of pedal, but we have every type of player come in too, and we encourage them to demo it and plug it in the store. And we don't have ISO booths. We're not a giant, you know, big box retailer. We hear everything you're playing, and you know, it doesn't stand out to us. In fact, like I always say, I only notice when people are playing in the store now when it's exceptionally bad. But if you're a great player, like, you know, people come in there to get discovered sometimes, and they'll just show off for like an hour, and it's like we don't even hear it. We're working, we're doing stuff, and I you know, I don't want to go too far down that. That's a whole rabbit hole there. But I find it. We all get a kick out of like all the different types of players who come in. The pedal let me roll this back. We encourage people to come in and play. I don't want this to sound discouraging at all. We love it when people get to try it out before they take it home. That's why we offer it, and we're never going to back away from that. No matter how annoying it gets sometimes, you know, if someone turns it up all the way because they want to crank an amp for a minute, sure. But if they want to do that for an hour, like there's common decency that should come into play.
Yeah, totally.
Too. Yeah, you know.
Totally. But so I mean, that brings up a couple of things. Whether it's studio gear, microphones, sometimes it's just like the latest computer or guitar pedals and stuff like that. There's that experience as musicians, as home studio people, where you're like, what do I want to get? What should I get? What sounds good and stuff like that. And, there's a lot you can glean from YouTube videos, but also like only so much. So it's pretty awesome to be able to walk into a place, actually plug into some pedals, see what you sound like through those.
Exactly. And you can bring your own guitar. You can even bring your own amp if you want. Just so you can hear it with your rig. And, with new stuff, if you live in the neighborhood, we give you 3 days to try it at home with your stuff and return it if you don't like it. You know? So
that's cool.
We can't do like 30 days or anything like that because we're a mom and pop shop. But
sometimes you need to like play with the band back in the rehearsal space, just see what it really sounds like.
Exactly.
It's amazing too with pedals. They've come such a long way since I guess I don't know how much they've changed since I first met you, probably a lot, but certainly since I started playing guitar now, because like, when I started all the pedals were analog circuits and now they're just as likely a digital circuit inside. And that's quite a variety of sounds,
Oh yeah. There's some amazing boxes out there these days that can do anything and everything under the sun.
You feel like it's just like a little computer. It's just taking my computer and just shrinking it and sticking it in a pedal sometimes.
Well, with the Eventide stuff for sure. I'm a huge Eventide fan. I have rack mount gear of theirs and pedals, and they've always been like my desert island boxes, because like the H9s and the H9Ds, they can do everything, and you can combine effects and you can loop stuff. You have a tuner in there. It's an entire pedal board, and there's giant versions of that now, like the Helixes and there's a new one from Boss, I think, that just came out.
There's even a new H9 from Eventide.
The H9D,
the bigger one with more buttons on it.
Yeah, and it's basically 2 H9s in one, but with a bunch of new algorithms and patches and features. But I haven't had a tuner on my board since the H9 came out. I mean, I
use the tuner.
I just use the tuner on the. It's really accurate, and
I always forget.
You can tune.
Sometimes with the advanced pedals, though, like you have to really train your brain. Like, what's the button combo to get into it and use the stuff? I always sort of forget. I have to go back to the manual. But I use it a ton in studio recordings. A lot of times I'll put it at the end of the chain because it's got that stereo capability, and I can split it out to 2 amps. And sometimes I probably underuse it, and you probably experience this a lot with pedals and stuff, where it's like a pedal might be able to do 1,000 things, but you're like, I'm going to mostly use it for this one feature or whatever, because of convenience, and
you get stuck in a
or just like it works for your sound,
Absolutely.
But like I'll use it with the iPad to control it and just kind of like do a slight delay chorus, widening,
sort of the H3000 sort of thing.
Yeah, and then over here you see I've got the H9000.
You got the big boy,
which I guess is like 16 of those H9s in it.
That's a monster. Insane. I mean, that's probably like the top of the food chain on the Eventide effects units.
But you know what's so amazing about that? Because like sometimes, so the H9000 Rockstars, if you're not familiar with it, of course, it's like it's like rocket science in a box for your studio. And sometimes we find ourselves asking the question of like, well, why do I want to get an outboard gear? Because I've got a plug-in version of it or whatever. And I think to me, the real answer is latency. We always forget about that. When you have dedicated outboard gear, you can actually record stuff through it in real time and use the effects. Whereas if you try to use the same effects as a plugin, you're like, oh, I'll use it more for a mix effect or whatever, because I can't record through it. But anyway, we digress in a good way, like we always do on this podcast. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, Brandon, and give us the brief story arc to getting into music and ending up here in Nashville with the studio and stuff. By the way, you mentioned Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah,
isn't that home of Marilyn Manson? I think it was.
I don't think Manson, but Limp Bizkit.
Oh, Limp Bizkit.
Limp Bizkit. Leonard Skinner. Who else is from Jacksonville? I used to be roommates with a hardcore band. Some of the guys that I lived with, they were called Evergreen Terrace. Nice. There's bands from Jacksonville.
Leonard Skinner was from there.
Yeah, everyone thinks they're from Alabama.
I probably just remember some story in the Marilyn Manson, autobiography.
Right. Maybe he did something
happened in Jacksonville or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think he's from there.
Probably not.
But
I get that all wrong.
But I know Limp Bizkit is, and that I thought maybe that was the correlation there. But yeah, there's an eclectic, interesting mix of artists from Jacksonville.
Right on.
It's interesting.
So you started out getting into like guitar first for you?
Yeah. I got into guitar at 9. I always liked music. Like I was a music nut as a kid. And my first concert when I was 9 years old was the Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness tour for Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh yeah, right.
And that blew me away. And but I was interested in guitar at that point, but it wasn't until I saw Sonic Youth on TV throwing their guitars around, and their guitars sounded like lasers, and I did not understand what was happening. I picked up a guitar and I was trying to mimic those sounds. So obviously the first time I picked up a guitar, I wasn't even trying to make it sound like a guitar. So I think that sort of molded my mentality of approaching guitar in a strange way. Obviously I like playing guitar as a guitar too. I'm not just trying to manipulate it all the time, but that's what intrigued my 9-year-old brain. I didn't understand how they were getting those sounds. I didn't know what a stomp box was. I didn't know even how you plug a guitar into an amp. I didn't know anything. I just picked up an acoustic guitar and I was trying to make those sounds. Obviously, it wasn't going to happen, but I didn't understand what was between the guitar and the final outcome. So that's what got me like really sort of perked up to it. And then I got my first guitar that Christmas. It was a Fullerton Strat sort of copy. Not Fuller. Fullerton was the model, but who was the company? Aria. Oh yeah. Aria Pro,
the
Fullerton.
Aria Pro.
Yeah.
Those were great.
Yeah, I wish I still had it. I don't know what happened to it. I covered it in stickers and then eventually swapped it out for a Les Paul, I think. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started. And then in high school, I was finally not shy enough to try to play in a band, and I met a band I thought was really cool that went to my school. And I auditioned. I played along to CDs in my room to like practice, and then went and jammed with them one time. And they're like, "Yeah, you want to join the band?"
It's real different playing with other people versus a CD or by myself.
Yeah, but honestly, like playing along to CDs is how I learned how to play, and it's how I learned how to play as a band member and not as a guitarist. I've never been a guitarist. Like I'm not a virtuoso by any means. I'm not a shredder or, soloist or anything like that by any stretch. I always appreciated the guitar players who played their role and contributed something as a team member, but also in a unique way, if that makes sense. And yeah, you can have your moments to shine, but I don't know. I learned how to play in a band by sitting in my room, playing my favorite CDs and trying to find the chords that they were playing and play along until I could play the whole CD front to back. And that was like what I did every day. So
speaking of guitar pedals, that's one of the things that I rediscovered or discovered in the past year was getting these cheap ass looper pedals.
Yeah.
And how powerful that is. Like I started getting the cheap ones that aren't even any use on stage. But like if you can just loop yourself playing 3 chords and then solo over it, it's like, it's just so much fun because it's like it gives you that ability to jam out and solo forever, and the band never quits.
Never quits. And you can see how far you can take things. And once you get like the initial noodling out of the way of the sort of expected route that you're going to go, then you sort of waver off and do these strange, patterns that are not the notes that you would expect. And that's usually when you end up with like a cool song idea.
Yeah.
That's really, I love loopers for that reason.
I feel for people who actually want to use the looper on stage, because when I stumble on something, I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm going to ever be able to remake this loop sound, this random thing I just did.
Yeah, and you got to be so good at timing with your feet too, with the loopers. If you mess that up on stage, that's nerve-wracking. But
for rehearsing and just like jamming along to yourself at home, the cheap ones that like are kind of hard to get perfect.
Yes.
Those are great because all you got to do is loop those, 3 chords and you're like, oh.
If you can get it in under 14 seconds, I love the DL4 for that. The
DL4, which one is that?
The line 6 delay, the green one.
Oh yeah, I've got that.
It's got that looper in it. It's 14 seconds, but you can manipulate it and reverse it and half speed it and half time it, double speed. Yeah, those are really fun. You can manipulate those loops in so many ways with just the foot switches. That's always been my favorite. But if you need more than 14 seconds, there's plenty of other great ones.
It has a bit of a sound and a tone to it, too. I noticed that some of these pedals that do lots of stuff. So that's a good example of a digital.
Yes.
You know, that. And I forgot what the model of the blue pedal is, but I've got that one, too.
The modulation one.
For the modulation.
Yep.
And it's fun to get like the wide variety of sounds. But have you noticed that pedals, like in your experience, how critical is it that the sampling chip in the pedal is really high quality? Because that must make a big difference in all those designs too, right?
Yeah. I mean, I like pedals that have a character. And I like the pristine ones too, if I need it to be, you know, super transparent or something. But, you know, I'm not a snob with pedals at all. I mean, I have an eclectic mix of things, and I like having really nice pedals, and I like having really cheap pedals because they all do their job and they offer something unique. But I don't know if that answers your question, but I like both.
Everything answers my question.
I like both.
Hey, Rockstar, come on over here. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, Declick, Declip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, and Limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off over at isotope.com. All right, so I didn't even think of this question till now, but
okay.
Let's talk about pedal boards. Let's talk about the challenge as guitar players who maybe are playing live, but also in the studio. Like, what have you discovered about the balance of having a love for pedals and all these sounds you can make, and now you're like, how do I organize these? How do I just grab the pedal I want in the moment? You know, I got to hook all these things up. Sometimes I don't want to waste time in the studio. You know, you've got the live rig. That's a little bit of a different story, but maybe you've discovered that there's a flexibility between studio and live and back to studio. And then you also have the question of, you know, should I be running stuff through these pedals back in the studio that aren't guitars, and what's an easy way to do that? You want to talk about that issue a little bit?
Sure, yeah. If you're in a band and you need a live rig, you know, you have your songs pretty much figured out at that point, I would imagine. And even if you're just still writing, you can start with the generic signal flow of, you know, what a pedal board should consist of, but then you can put your own twist on it and, you know, for example, put your reverb before your fuzz, you know, and do unorthodox things to find your own unique sound. But if you just need like a straight up grab and go rig, there's plenty of great options for that. As far as the difference between live and studio, you know, if you're blessed enough to be able to have more than one rig, you can have your live rig, and then you can also obviously hit an amp in the studio with that pedal board and mic your amp. But if you need to send other things through it, you know, the radial boxes are great. The EXTC3s, or EXTC, I think is what it's called. It's the orange thing. There's a DI version and a stereo one, and then there's a 500 series version. They're great for reamping through pedals. So at my house, I have the sort of stereo DI version where I have different pedals, like not even on a board, just kind of on a table, sort of. I could swap out easily for sending any source through them, and then I'll have a stereo return on my mixer at home, and obviously a stereo return on my mixer at the studio. But at the studio, I have a wall, a pedal wall. You know, a lot of people do that. I think Vance Powell's got one too, and you know, where you treat it as an outboard rack, but you basically have a wall of pedals where they're fixed to the wall with Velcro, and you can swap them out really easily.
If they weren't attached, they just fall to the ground. It's like a vertical wall.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you have a power supply that's just living on that wall. that you can just swap anything out. And, I'll record drums and feed them through the pedal wall and have some interesting results. And I'll print it on a separate channel so we don't have to use it.
So the wall is it's like a, the soft fabric is the wall, and and each pedal has the little Velcro teeth on the bottom of it. And you just
it's
put the pedal up on the wall when you need it, or vice versa.
They live up there. Yeah. So basically a big square, and then we basically made like a wood square and then put a fabric on it that would stick really well to Velcro.
Yeah.
They would adhere really well. And then I put an array of pedals up there in a order that I thought made sense. And I honestly haven't changed that in over a year and a half. I really love the selection on the wall right now.
And you run sounds through it, or you run your guitars through it, or both?
Everything. Yeah, anything. If we're doing vocals, and I have every type of like effect on the wall too. So I've been really digging the Von Gone stuff lately. I don't know if you've heard of that company.
No, you're gonna know 5 bazillion pedals.
Yeah, exactly. Heard of. VONGON. You should check them out. They're great. They have a reverb called the Ultra Shear, and it's got a vibrato on it too. It's just killer.
I just got a tremolo pedal recently.
Yeah, which one?
I ended up getting the MXR one, and it has
the purple guy.
Yeah, the purple guy, and it has this. The very last setting is like a phasery kind of sound that's just great.
That's awesome. I think it's funny because I think Blair, my partner at the store, had a hand in kind of I would say designing it, but I think he had some ideas for him, and they implemented them, and it might even be that setting you're talking about. I'm not sure.
That's cool.
So go Blair.
Well, so now you guys also have a console in your studio, right? So tell us about your studio. It's Schematic Sounds?
Schematic Studios, yeah. It's in...
Schematic Studios.
Goodlettsville, Madison area. Should I start from the beginning? Because this is a journey. This is the journey. Okay, here we go. This is the big thing. So when I had a house in Donaldson back in 2000.
Back before the tornado carried it off to the land of Oz.
Oh God, yeah. That was, you're talking about the 2020 tornado?
Yep.
Yeah, I moved to Hermitage right before that. But so basically 2015 to 2019, I lived in this house in Donaldson. And that is where I had this like shell in the backyard. It was like a
storage
metal garage or storage thing. Yeah. And I was like, man, one day I really need to just insulate this thing and build a frame within it and have a cool practice space for. I was in a band at the time, so we can practice and jam and maybe set up a microphone in there to so we could remember our ideas. And then I started researching how to build it, and that's when I got really kind of addicted and carried away, honestly, with if I'm going to build this, like, this is going to be mine. I don't want it to be just, if I'm doing this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go all out. I'm going to do this right so I can enjoy it for years to come, and use it fully. So I did the whole thing. We did a shell with a room within a room, basically, and then the air gap, and then spray foam insulation with every nook and cranny and crevice. Grounded the power out into the yard, and
you're basically building one big quiet room, right?
Yeah.
So you guys could set up as a band in
3 rooms. Yeah.
Oh, separate rooms.
Yeah,
okay,
it was about 500 square feet, got everything taken out of there and built this thing and got all the angles, and I was just really, if I'm gonna frame this thing and build this and put drywall and have an AC unit put in here, like, I need to get this stuff right so it sounds right. And I just went down the rabbit hole with that, and putting patch panels in the walls and everything, tie lines.
And it's interesting because you started with you said a metal building,
Yeah.
shed building.
Which you would think would be really bad.
Well, but what's interesting is I had similar thinking too, and I think often we do, where we look at a existing thing, we think, oh, let's build out the inside. And sometimes I'd be curious whether you found this too. Sometimes you discover that by the time you're done, it really didn't matter if you started with something. Like you could have built a building from scratch.
Yes. Yeah.
Considering the amount of work that you put onto the inside of it.
Yeah. That outside metal shell was literally just there to shroud the reality of what was inside, so that, anybody that happened to wander into my backyard, which hopefully they wouldn't have any idea that there's anything valuable inside. So that it was not like inviting, like, hey, there's a studio in here. It just looked like a crappy shed. But once you walked in, it was like a whole nother world. And it was glorious. I loved it. It was very tight, very cozy, but it was exactly what I set out to build, and it sounded cool. And the main space was where I got my first mixer in there, which was a Yamaha, not the 1516, but something very similar. What was it? Maybe it was a 1516. Anyways, it was a Yamaha mixer I got cheap on eBay for like $80. And it came in a road case shipped to me. And it got there in like 4 days. I don't understand how this lady shipped it for less than what I bought it for. Or how it was that it was a monitoring rig at a church, I think.
Right.
And they just needed to get rid of it, I guess.
I keep kicking my microphone. I should stop doing that, rock stars. So yeah, well, all right. So, but now you guys have upgraded to the Neotek or something, right?
Yes. Sorry, I'm taking my time getting there, but so that was in the Donaldson house. Long story short, after a couple of years, that was me learning the ropes of how to record. I got like you mentioned earlier, I got rid of a bunch of pedals so I can get a couple microphones. I started with 257s and RE20, and that's it. And then I started getting rid of more pedals, and then a friend kind of like perma loaned me a 388. And then I went ham. I got an Otari 24-track tape recorder. I got a 2-track for the mix down, also an Otari. So I had the Yamaha in there, and I had the 388, and I had these Otari things, and I only got to use them a few times for like sessions, that with artists were ready to record a tape. But I really just wanted to have the experience and like kind of do my part and catch up for all my lost years. I wanted to start by recording the tape so that I could appreciate the digital realm more, and also be better about decision making and committing.
So the Atari was a 2-inch.
Yes.
Was it the I forget the model number.
It was the now I'm gonna blank. It was the Otari MTR 12.
12, okay.
And then I had the MTR, the 2-track mixed down master version, which now that I'm sitting here, I'm forgetting.
Did you automatically simultaneously have a computer rig going, like with Pro Tools or something like that alongside of it?
Basically, the mixer would feed the Otari, and then the Otari would feed the Apollos. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's what I found. I found a really useful way to do analog was to have the analog machine where you could basically set up a tracking session and go straight into Pro Tools, or you could go through the tape machine, and then all the outputs of the tape machine went to the tracks in Pro Tools, so that you could track to it and then just transfer the take right in and then just keep working in the computer that way.
Exactly. And it was already there.
And then for mix down, you could just, mix back to the 2-track if you want.
Yeah, and the tape already had the lovely, like rounding off of the high end and the bump and the lows, and everything just sounded smoother to me. And I loved it.
Did you experiment with listening to did you always hear the tape machine through the Apollos and through the computer outputs to the speakers, or did you ever take the output of the tape machine and the console direct to the speakers and hear that as well?
That's a good question. I think I always had them bridged. Like I would sometimes just record through the Otari's the machine itself without actually
not
using
even
the
tape, right? You just
just because I liked how it sounded. But then I would eliminate the Otari. I'd use my patch bay and not use the Atari just to hear the difference.
Yeah.
But not what you said. Not exactly that.
It's worth a try sometime because it might make you cry, because I remember doing it here when I was experimenting with all that, and when I had the MCI console in here. I didn't often do it because once you arrive at a setup that's going to work to make the record, that's kind of what you need. But when you're exploring what do things sound like, it's amazing to hear the sound of the mic going to the tape machine straight to the speakers. I remember, doing that the first time. I was like, wow, that really I don't get that sound coming out of Pro Tools when I record it that way.
It's amazing.
And it's like, it'll make you shed a tear, because then you're like, God, I wish everything could sound like this all the time.
Right.
And it can.
Yes.
You just it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of work. You either have to stay analog all the way through to the final master process, or you have to be extremely thoughtful about your converters and cable runs and all that kind of stuff.
Sort of emulating that final result as best you can.
Yeah, but a simple, that brings up another topic, which excuse me, I
will get to the Neotek.
That's all right.
Yeah,
it brings up a topic which I discovered when I started doing the Bonnaroo hay bale studio recordings, because we would take all our mics and then go to the console, no tape machine, no multi-track, and just mix through the console down to 2-track. And so it's like an incredibly pure sound.
Yeah.
And I guess at any live sessions, where you're mixing live now, a lot of consoles are digital, so that might not even count. But otherwise, live would be an equivalent to that too, I guess. But it's worth hearing if you get a chance. Rockstar, it's just the simplest recording chain. It's just so pure. Sometimes you're like, you're like, well, I can't EQ that high end into that sound to get that back. That's just natural.
Especially when you're pressed for time, like with what you were talking about, the hay bale thing.
Yeah.
If you're forced to just automatically mix everything to 2-track mix down, or a stereo track, and that's it. You don't have multi-tracks. Making those quick decisions and getting your balance, sometimes that ends up better than stuff you spend weeks on.
Yeah, totally.
It's really interesting.
So tell us about the Neotek. And also, when you were talking about this pedal wall, I realized that one of the benefits in your story is having a console means you can easily send something through pedals or whatever. It's faster and easier than even making that decision as an afterthought from Pro Tools or from the computer, Like when you want to take a sound, if you're recording a sound of the computer, you're like, let's run this through some pedals. Now you're like, okay, now I'm going to send it through an output over to the pedals, back in on another input, on another track. Now we've got latency issues, and we're trying to maybe having to compensate. When you're in that console world, you can run pedals parallel on a sound and blend it right in, and then record that, get a sound and then be like, I like that sound, record it.
It's there. Yeah. I'm really big about making decisions on the way in. And that was, that took me some time to learn those lessons and to kind of find that was how I like to work. And again, I'm still a noob. I mean, I started all this in 2015 or 2016. So I'm still very much a student of
but
recording.
you've been advancing your appreciation of music a lot longer than that.
Yes.
And your understanding of sounds and what is good.
Right.
And it's funny, even the pedal topic, the guitar pedal topic, fundamentally guitar pedals are sound committers.
That's true. That's true.
Because they're usually on the way into the recording.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like to, I don't like pushing decisions till after the fact. I like, one of the most rewarding things to me about recording in general is after a take, when a band comes in the control room and you play it back and they said, did you already mix that or something? Like, this sounds like a record. That's what makes me happy, because you force them to, there's two different mentalities. If you capture a live band, you don't want to intrude on their sound, impose on their sound. You want to capture them as truly as possible and as honestly as possible. But if you have an artist that comes in and they really want to mess with stuff and manipulate things, taking the time to get the sounds on the way in is really important too. And same with simple things like EQ and compression on a drum set or something. Having it not. I go wild with optionitis if we record everything sterile and then do everything in mix, because when the artist comes in to listen to it, it sounds like dog shit. And you're like, just use your imagination. That's not fun. They can do that at home.
Right.
You don't like. Why are you coming into a studio to record everything super clean and not have any character or even a balance for that matter? And I found early on that that's more like work to me, and it's not fun and it's not creative. So I always encourage artists that come in to record, like, let's take the first half of the first day, and like really get everything set up. Let's set up stations for everybody so we can work fast. And we're going to have everything dialed in. I'm not going to hit record until the drums sound right in the room. And then I'm not going to hit record until the mics are placed correctly. And I'm not going to hit record until everything is streamlined after that is sounding right to me and sounding right to you. And let's record like a couple phrases and then come in and listen to it. Make sure those drums sound like your drums. Let's make sure that sounds like what you want it to sound like. And then we can get into it.
Look, if you're like me, then you love having cool instruments in your studio, right? No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments and sounds you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then adding awesome overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Use the code ROCK10 now to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples, all over at nativeinstruments.com. Let's talk about the concept of that. So with a console, do you tend to think about it like the EQ and the parallel compression and stuff like that is all happening on the console, and then going to tracks, so it's committing to tracks in Pro Tools, and then you're just hearing like what you're hearing playback out of Pro Tools as 2 channels is what comes to the speakers, and like playing back out of Pro Tools doesn't need a bunch more plugins yet. I mean, you might add them later in the mix, but your goal is like, without adding anything to it, it's playing back off of Pro Tools, sounding great.
Absolutely.
Like that, as opposed to having a setup where you're recording the multi-tracks in Pro Tools and then the multi-tracks are coming back to the console and hitting all those EQs and faders.
Right.
Where it's like you're not committing that necessarily. Because like, those are different ways to work.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. I used to have my line inputs freed up on the console for playback, so they could, because it's an inline console. That way I could do those things, and I still can work that way, but usually the console is being used, every channel is being used to track something, and whether it's a return or a source itself, I usually print everything on the way in, and then the playback is just the left and right out of the DAW, which I use Luna most of the time.
Okay.
And whatever the artist wants to use, but if it's my choice, I go with Luna.
What do you like about Luna?
No latency, since we're Apollo rig at the studio.
Meaning you can use a UAD plugin without latency to sort of process something on the way in.
Well, and just the DAW and the interface are integrated with one another, so there's no middleman per se.
So it's like my Pro Tools HDX rig, where there's kind of essentially no latency, and you can record right through stuff.
I also like the way Luna sounds. When I was toying with trying it, I mean, I started trying it immediately when it came out, and they've made so many improvements since then. But our mutual friend Jakir King, he is a big, he's a UA guy, and he does some work for them. But he was like, man, that's all I use. And I was like, well, if it's good enough for you, I'll try it. And I'm just used to it now. Having since I don't have my Atari anymore, having the Studers and the Ampexes on the just right there integrated, built into the mixer view of Luna, as well as the API console and the Neve summing, and it's all right there. And when I'm mixing at home, if I don't want to use the API sound, I do what you do over here, and I have the UC1 and the UF8 and all that, so I can use the SSL sort of mix down protocol. But I still use Luna. But to backtrack for a minute, if you want me to get to how the console journey, that I can kind of tie it back there. After I moved out of we sold the Donaldson house, and me and my ex-wife, we went our separate ways at that, but we have children together, so it's very amicable. It's all good. Either way, TMI.
Kids are the best records we ever made.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. So we had to sell the house, so there goes my studio. I moved to this rental place in Hermitage, Tennessee, and I got a Neotek Elan. It was a smaller footprint. It wasn't the Elite yet. And I spent so much time and money getting that thing rigged up. And I built this basement studio. And literally the week I finished it, I was talking to my friend Arun and Dave over at Schematic. And I've always had my eye on that place. I love the A room in there. It's just so vibey. It sounds great. And they said, hey, we have basically, if you want to take over the A room, move all your stuff in, like we can, let's be partners. And I was like,
nice. So Schematic is an existing studio that you were able to partner up in.
Yeah, the B room is the original studio. It's been there for a long time. The urban legend is about Friends in Low Places, how it was written there and sold for a bar tab that night.
I don't know anything about that. No,
so Friends in Low Places was written in the original B room, which is where Arun works now, Arun Bali.
Where is the studio?
It's in Goodlettsville, Madison area. It's right by Thai Phuket and like Rivergate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, by the skate center, actually, if you know where that is.
I do know where that is.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. And so this is a place that has historical context here in Nashville and everything.
A little bit, yeah. Just the small studio, and then in 2010, the previous owner started building a much larger facility, which is the A room, like a more elaborate, legitimate studio. It was never quite finished until the late 2010s, almost 2020-ish, I think.
So you guys are building a room for friends in high places.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then my friends that I speak of, they went in there and they finished and they replaced all the cabling and everything, and they had some pros come in and do all that. And they were running just a few pieces of outboard and a Toft. And so I moved in right when COVID hit, right after I finished my build out at my house at the time. So that was unfortunate timing, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity. So I sold the Ataris and moved the Elan in. I sold the Ataris that way I could fund the move to the studio because I couldn't say no to this space. Moved everything in to Schematic. That was, there wasn't a lot of sessions because, again, COVID just hit. Everyone was in panic mode. And
turns out starting a new studio is a lot of alone time anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I spent a lot of that
you
time.
Got into the whole wiring stuff.
Oh,
right?
God.
Tell us about that. Just jump right into that.
Well, I documented some of it on my very
you
non-serious
got some YouTube videos, right?
My very non-serious iPhone YouTube videos. Just to document it for myself, really. Just to remember the day I moved everything in. So we, a couple months of wiring everything up.
What are some of the big challenges in wiring up a console? I mean, is it like, do you have any advice to somebody who's like, oh, I'm thinking about getting a big console for my studio?
Well, make sure you're friends with a great tech, because that's not me. I understand the ins and outs of it, but as far as me sitting there doing a lot of the soldering as a father and a business owner, 2 businesses now, basically, I spent my time prepping everything so that he can go behind and do the actual soldering or the pun. This is for the Elan because I did a lot more for the Elite. So long story short, we got the Elan in, moved everything in, had some great private sessions with just me and Dave. He's in a band called May. So we started doing some like practice sessions together, and I recorded a few other people here and there, sparsely because, again, COVID was at a tight. But then after that all started dying off, we had more sessions come in. Not that many. Slow start, to be honest with you. But we had some people coming in, and I got really good at navigating the console and knowing the ins and outs and getting a good feel for the workflow. I'm a big workflow guy. I like to work fast and really set. I'll spend days and nights at the studio just cranking music and just figuring out the best way to like leave it and set it and forget it.
And now, was this when you arrived at, I'm going to go through the console? Well, so an inline board means you can go into the mic pre's, you can go through the EQs, you can set a level to the tape machine, and then you can come back on a fader again if you want, or you can choose to set all your levels in Pro Tools and then kind of adjust the mix slightly, level balance there, and just have the 2-track coming back to the master section.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'll...
And what about headphone? You talked about building stations for people for recording.
Yeah.
What'd you learn about making sure people have a headphone mix that works for them, but also a mix that works for you in the control room, but also that lets you switch songs without having to like forget to turn things on and off and all that kind of crap?
Right. So I use the ADAT Q system on the Apollos for 8 channels of Q sends, but I also have a aux AB on the console, which I use for headphone mixes in case there's a bug in the computer, which is not, which definitely is something that happens sometimes.
Back up and explain the ADAT Q system output off the Apollo. What is that? Is that a feature on the Apollo, or is that something that you just came up with for how to use it?
No. Yeah, that's a feature. There's each Apollo has a different amount of ADAT outputs that you can, depending on if you're doing 44.1 or 96K or that determines the amount of ADAT capabilities or outputs that you have. So I kind of have it set to where all the cues in Luna, or if you're just using the console software that comes with your Apollo, you can use those to send out ADAT, so you don't have to eat up any hardware or any analog outputs. So it saves you your analog outs for processing instead.
Right. So let's conceptualize this.
Yeah.
So the tracks are getting recorded into Luna. You're building a mix that comes out the two mix, comes to your speakers. Are your musicians going to hear your 2 mix, or are they going to hear the Q sends off those multi-tracks?
So
do you just have the Q sends be post fader so that like your mix is sort of reflected in their headphones, but they can get just a little more or less of something else?
I tried in the beginning to let everyone control their own mix, and I learned really fast that's a headache because a lot of them don't know how to operate the stations, the headphone stations. And I went and listened to what they were listening to, and it was like, whoa, no wonder you couldn't follow.
And what were the headphone stations you were trying out?
The power plays, the Behringer power plays, where they can control their own mixer
things. And do those are like Ethernet cable sends or something like that?
Exactly. So most sessions now, I will just send them my mix, and they don't ever say anything. Unless they're like more me, then I can just say, oh yeah, you're on channel 2. But I always have them turned down at the beginning of the session so they don't get excess of anything. So if they want more me, which is usually all they want, they can just go to channel 2 and turn it up. Or I can just do it manually, honestly, from Luna.
I agree with you that usually it's more me that people want, but sometimes it's also just less drums.
Exactly.
Because if you got the guitar players next to the drummer and the drummer's rocking out, that might be the only setup that really makes sense in your studio. But you're like, what do you do? Because you don't want to. What's frustrating when you're engineering is you don't want to build a mix that doesn't make any sense in the control room, that works for everybody else, but doesn't make sense when you play back the song.
Right. So usually I'm monitoring Luna. Like I'm monitoring my DAW. I'm monitoring the mix that, all the faders in the DAW are at 0, but I'm tracking it with sort of a balance in mind. But I'm also, I do move the faders in the DAW as we go to build that sort of like rough balance. And that's what I'm feeding them as we go. But if they do want less drums or something, then I'll just turn down that mix and I'll go out to their headphone thing or ask them to just, hey, drums are on 1 and 2. You can turn those down if they're too loud, or I'll just tone the drums down in the mix.
Right.
And
so there's a little bit of a breakout.
A little bit of a meet in the middle there.
Yeah. And then the other part that I'm remembering, is so frustrating is then the moment you do an overdub with something, let me overdub something.
Right.
Now they need the mix that you have in the control room in their headphones because they don't want to hear no drums.
Yeah. And I'll just,
it's always like, it's like, it's funny how complex that gets where like, I say it complex as the engineer, but you realize that for the rest of the world, they're like, dude, why can't you just play the song? Like they're just like, it shouldn't be complex.
Right.
It should just be like,
they don't understand that you're balancing
you're
two
like,
separate
you have
mixes.
to switch mixes and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. So I try to keep those separated as much as possible to streamline and make those changes quick and easy. And it's situational, but 90% of the time these days, everyone's like, yeah, it sounds great. And they can truck along.
Right.
So
The S-Series by Atom Audio, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors, blending advanced engineering and in-house design. With 5 models in various sizes and configurations, these monitors build on Atom Audio's iconic heritage while incorporating new technology for improved acoustic performance. The range includes the compact S2V with the 7-inch woofer, the 3-way S3H with twin 7-inch woofers, the vertical S3V with a single 9-inch woofer, and the powerful S5H and S5V main monitors featuring a 12-inch woofer and exceeding 131 dBSPL per pair. Despite differences in size and power, all these models provide highly analytical sound for professional audio applications. The S-Series includes new woofers, mid-range drivers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine for crossover optimization. The result is accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail in bass and mid frequencies with wider frequency ranges, and forward-looking digital connectivity, all in a durable design. The S-Series ensures longevity in your studio, backed with a 5-year guarantee at atomaudio.com. I am massively impressed with Isotope Ozone. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The Mastering Assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need for a professional result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And the magic of Master Rebalance means you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now, when I send off the masters for approval and get comments back like, holy bleep, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, you're a wizard, finally I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge, well then I know I'm doing something right. So check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great apps at isotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show, aka the jam session. My guest today is Brandon Highfill, joining us here at the Toy Box Studio. We're actually not in Recording Studio Rockstars HQ, my new studio. We're back down in the studio because the house is getting clean today, and I had to tear the podcast apart. But anyway,
complaining, lots of fun gear to look at.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of fun, to be sitting in the middle of actually the stuff you use every day.
Yeah.
You ready to jam?
Let's jam.
All right. So in your playlist, which we have a link to in the show notes, Rockstars, please go check it out. Brandon's got a lot of cool sounding music there. Particularly some great guitar stuff, some great synth, kind of work and stuff like that. So a lot of fun sounding music. But one of the first tracks is a band Glister, which I think is your music. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my little solo proj.
Yeah, it's great. So You know, the first two tracks in there, Dying in the City into Toy.
Yeah.
Got a few questions around that.
Okay.
The first thing is, I didn't realize that it even switched songs.
Yeah.
So I think it was like album tracks that are connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you knew how to, if you had anything to say about how to upload your music so that you get that experience playing back on streaming.
Right.
Or if that's too outside of your
the seamlessness
expertise.
of it.
Yeah. How did you have it seamless like that? Because I didn't even
Right.
realize it had switched songs while I was listening.
Well, it was one song originally, like the intro was sort of part of it, but then that was just the first single I had, and to this day the only thing I've released under that moniker.
It's cool stuff, man. It's good music. You should be you should do a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm leaning into that. I have an arsenal of back catalog that I'm going to be that I've been working on, but that's the only one that's out there. But I had you
have a really advanced sense of melody and harmony too for the vocals parts.
Well, that I can't take credit for all that. That was Pat Sansone singing on that one.
Really?
Yeah,
that's Pat Sansone singing on that? Holy shit!
Yeah, he's a buddy of ours, and I'm just. I saw you had James Lugo on the show.
Yeah, I
had my first vocal lesson with him pretty recently.
Oh, that's cool.
I want to go back. I haven't yet. Hey James, if you're listening, I'm coming back. I promise. I've never tried to sing in my life, but I sing along to stuff, and I'm like, maybe I have something to work with. I don't know. I've always been shy with it, but so with this Glyster project, I'm a big like Massive Attack fan, and I like a bunch of stuff, and where there's different vocalists on different tracks depending on the mood of it. And so that first track, Pat was the perfect fit. And,
that's great. That sounds a lot of fun.
And I like having like a rotating cast of singers on this Glyster project, and eventually I'll probably try to sing one of them. But that's the first one, and I felt really good about it, and it was catchy, and it also had a lot of my influences infused into it.
There's a saxophone on there or something like that too?
Yeah, Mickey Gutierrez. That guy is a beast.
In fact, I couldn't even tell. Like I thought it was guitar feedbacks, and then I realized maybe some of this is saxophone sounding like guitar feedback.
I'm so glad you noticed that, because that's sort of a approach that gets me really excited, is intertwining guitar feedback with saxophone like solos, and just making this chaos, that sort of surrounds a really rock solid rhythm section. I really like the juxtaposition of those two things existing at the same time. And there's a lot of influences that feed into that too. So, but yeah, Mickey he's a monster saxophone player.
Let's see what I want to ask you about that. So, one of the things too is it like one of the notes I wrote down was Queens of the Stone Age.
Oh, really?
Yeah, are you a fan of those guys? Because
definitely.
The kind of the driving eighth note guitar stuff really reminded me of that too.
I can see that, a lot of downstrokes and stuff.
Yeah.
I never thought about them when I was doing that song, but I can totally see what you're saying. It's not as heavy. Some of my older bands were heavy like that, but this is not noisy in a heavy way. It's more noisy in a chaotic way. But there's a lot of melody. It was honestly like a lot of like Stereolab influence in there, and David Bowie and Sonic Youth, stuff like that.
What about the so you've got like fast-paced, up-tempo drums and everything, real sort of precise drumming. And the track really holds together well too. So nice work on that.
Appreciate it.
What do you say, or what are your thoughts about how to get to a result like that? Did you record drums and then do some drum editing? Did you just work with a great drummer where the performance is spot on?
That was just one take. The whole song's one take, except for a few Pat's overdubs on vocals. And the saxophone was after the fact, but the guitar, the initial guitar track, the bass and the drums were all played at the same time, because I like tracking live.
Right on.
And
playing to a click, I'm guessing.
No? Yeah, I think we did on that one. Yeah. But we wavered off a little bit, which I prefer. I don't like sounding robotic with being right on. Like if we waver off, I'm not going to fix it later.
Do you have any feelings or a take on the correctability of tracks after you record them? Like, do you have any feelings about like, how much wiggle room there is for recording something and getting it almost right, but then kind of tightening it up through editing versus just simply playing it really well?
If we're there doing it, I'm just going to say, let's do it again. If it's not, if it wavers a little bit in a musical way and the push and pull of a natural human being, like I'll keep that. I like that a lot. I've never once edited drums to a grid. And
okay, there you go.
And I don't think I will. I've also never used samples either. Nothing against them. I like if you have a really terrible sounding drum recording on a kick or a snare or something, like if you need to use a sample, totally get that. I just haven't been. I've had like not great recordings, but I always try to make it work to where it's like, this is the sound of what happened that day. I want to capture that.
Now let's spin that comment towards synthesizers.
Yeah.
Does that never use a sample carry to never using a virtual synthesizer in the computer, or do you like to use those too?
I don't have the budget to have every synth that I want, so I definitely use a lot of soft synths, and the soft tube stuff and the UA stuff is killer, and there's a lot of other great stuff out there too. But usually I'll grab. I have a Mellotron. That's my most played.
A physical
Mellotron, just the micro one,
right?
Tell
us about the micro, because I haven't played with one of those yet. How big is it? And
it's maybe how many keys is that?
About the size of my little Casio SK1 or something.
No, it's a little bit. It's like twice the scale of that. I don't know how many keys that is off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I'm sorry.
Well, it's all right.
But it's got all the same engine as the rest of the Mellotrons with the Chamberlain
ones, yeah. It doesn't have the
library
actual tape in it, but it's the digital one.
Digital version, yeah. And you can control it with a bigger keyboard if you want to use two hands.
Oh, that's cool. And then what's the ballpark price on something like that?
That's like in the $900s.
900, so a little under $1,000.
Yeah, maybe $1,000.
Okay, so it's a commitment for a keyboard for sure, but it's not as much as getting a real Mellotron.
Right, right. Mellotron has always been my favorite sound as far as keyed instruments go. But at the studio we have more physical synths like Junos and Moog stuff and things like that. But at my house I have the Mellotron, and that goes back and forth since it's so portable.
Now, what about the in the computer synths?
Right.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's obviously so accessible to everybody. Yes. I'm really fascinated with the Native Instruments stuff and contact libraries and everything. Yeah. But it's so vast that I always feel like I'm just like a newbie looking, looking through the window and thinking like, which one should I try next? So
to be honest,
have you had some experience with any of that stuff?
Not that many. I found myself kind of sticking with my go-tos, like the UA/soft tube collab on the Moog stuff.
Oh, they have. So UA has a bunch of synth plugins in there as well.
In Luna, they have one in there where you can combine synths too, which is really nice. What is that called? Shape, I think is what that one is. But then they have the Moog, and then they have some other ones. And also, whenever I dabble in Ableton, there are some really great user-created Junos and things like that. I keep mentioning these. These are because these are my ones that I use, the Juno, Moog stuff, and Mellotrons. That's pretty much all I mess with.
They're great sounds, and a lot of times, there's so much that's possible with synthesizers, and you get in a computer. But a lot of the times, the sounds I'm looking for are musical, melodic things that will let me play a part that feels similar to a guitar,
right?
In a way,
yeah. Or you're creating some sort of soundscape background,
So now if you're using any of those digital ones, do you still find yourself going over to your guitar pedal wall of guitar pedals, or do you find the pedal wall goes with the real Juno when you're recording that?
Yes.
And the digital stuff just sort of stays in the computer when you're
pretty much. That? Yeah. Unless I have an idea and where I want to really get my hand on something. If I'm doing a virtual synth, I'll send it through a plug-in Space Echo or something if I don't have access to one that day.
Yeah. So another question.
Yeah.
When you're recording a virtual synth, does Luna do it in such a way that you have a MIDI track that gets recorded, plus you get the synth, and it's like playing the synth, or does it make it easy for you to actually print this synth sound just to a track as an audio track immediately while you're working?
Yeah, I can, it'll record the MIDI notes that you play on a keyboard, or you can, dial them in manually if you want. and it'll go through there. And then, you know, usually after I'm happy with it, I'll print it to a track so I can get rid of the MIDI thing altogether and free up some computer.
That's what I do in Pro Tools too. And I understand that there are a lot of production things where you want to have access to the MIDI stuff, but man, for the most part, for me, like that shit drives me crazy. I'm like,
same.
I'm like, I just played the part. Like I love what I just played.
Right.
I don't always love what I just played, but on that one overdub, I just loved the, you know, the part that was played. And I don't want it to be, or I do want it to be committed to a track, you know?
Yeah. And plus it's not going to hog up your computer anymore.
Yeah. I wish all DAW makers listening right now would consider that. Like, give us a version where you don't need to create a MIDI track. You don't need to do any of that. You just simply like play the damn thing and record it like audio, like it was a real synth out in the studio. Cause most of the time that's what we want. You know?
I mean, I guess the way around that is to set up like a send and then
you got
have
it. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you can get around
but
it.
Already, like, why do we have to do all that extra work?
Right. I hear you.
You know, it should be hidden. It should be
should be there.
Hidden in there. Okay, cool. So let me see what else was cool about that. There was in one of the chorus vocals in that song, I think in Toy maybe, it does, all of a sudden it goes into this infinite vocal delay effect.
Yeah. So
talk about that. So it's like you're singing. I love that kind of thing. And I hear it now and then. And I always think like, oh, that'd be cool to do. And then you're like, how the hell do you do that? But you're singing. All of a sudden the vocal note holds and then it just morphs into this like synth part that just continues on forever. Yeah.
So that was taking the vocal track, sending it out through the radial box I talked about earlier and hitting the UA Starlight on the Echoplex setting and manually tapping the rhythm as it was playing back, and then at the same time adjusting the feedback so it start oscillating like a Echoplex.
Oh, wow. So you're routing it out through actual pedals to now you're hitting the pedal wall.
I was mixing with pedals,
And then is that the kind of thing where you thought this is the effect I want to go get and then you knew how to do it? Or is it more like you started doing stuff and you stumbled on it and that's amazing?
No, I knew exactly what I wanted to do in that section that was the problem section of the song. I couldn't get from this point to that point. There was something missing bridging the gap. And so I found that to tie those two sections together really well. And I had that in my head. And so I just had to nail it, like a physical pedal performance, you know?
All right, we're going to make you break that down. So explain to a beginner what the hell you did.
I would take the track in the DAW. I would send it through an analog.
Track.
What's that? Yeah, the vocal track, and send it through an analog output on my SSL Big 6 or any mixer you have. And from then, use one of the sends of that channel that the vocal is being fed into to a stereo channel that is being fed by your pedal chain or your effect chain, whatever it might be, so that you can capture your real-time pedal performance and not have to use a mouse and the DAW to try to manipulate the pedal in such a way. It's just a lot easier to use your hands.
Right. So, and then which pedal is it again? You said
UA
it's
Starlight.
Also a UA pedal?
They have the Starlight, which is their delay, and it's stereo, and you can do mono or stereo, and it's got digital, it's got tape, it's got analog. You just kind of get like a repeating delay that goes on. It even has the Cooper time cubes built into that pedal, which I've never seen in a pedal before.
That's cool. That's cool.
And a lot of people don't know that, but that's a hidden setting in there, which is really cool. But yeah,
don't they have a Cooper time cube plugin in UA as well? Yeah,
they do. Yeah,
I need to get more UA stuff. I got the native ones recently, and I love them. They're great. They're excellent. They are slow to load, though. They're very slow to pop up on your screen, which I don't like.
I need to get into more native stuff. I only have Driver, and I love it. I use it all the time. I use that on saxophone a lot. I love saxophone in my songs. And so to really, mess up a saxophone with the Driver plugin is really fun. But I know Butch Vig has like drum libraries in there and like sample libraries. And I need to dive into contact stuff more.
So you've got this stuff going into the UA pedal.
Yeah.
And then you said the tap tempo button sort of like keeps repeating the loop for you or something, and then you get this.
I'm tapping in the tempo, and every time I tap it, it restarts his word, his vocal, the vocal, whatever the vocal was. And then as I'm tapping it, I have my other hand on the feedback knob, so it's oscillating but also keeping in time. And then I smear it and then cut it right when it goes to the next part, and then that's when the saxophone comes in. So his voice kind of bleeds into a saxophone and a synth, so it all sounds like it's melded together as one thing. And
that's cool. That's cool. And then the output of these pedals on the console, you're just feeding back into a new track,
right? A stereo track
in your DAW.
That's right.
All right, cool.
And no latency.
Well, and that reminds me, like there's that, and then you do have latency.
No
latency.
Because I'm using UA's
so
interface with UA software.
Yeah, but even so, I mean, even my HDX to go out and back in again, it's got latency, but in this case, it's not latency that matters.
Right.
I think.
Right.
And it's going to straighten itself out after you're done with recording anyway.
I didn't hear it though when I was doing it.
It's not the same as hearing latency when you're singing yourself and hearing it come back in the headphones.
I see what you're saying.
Like, that's weird sounding. Or like playing a part and all you hear is coming out of the computer speakers.
Exactly.
And there's a slight delay, after you hit the guitar sound or whatever.
Oh, that drives you crazy.
Or like MIDI stuff, like where you're hitting the keys and it's like, that's one of the things that kept me away from MIDI for so long in the studio was every time I'd mess with it, I'd play something and then I'd play it back and it just played back something that didn't sound at all like what I just did, or the quantize wasn't right or whatever. I'm just like, fuck this, man.
Yeah. Let me just play it.
I'm just gonna go play the real drums and guitars.
Yep. I'm like you in that way. I don't like fiddling with too much computer stuff, which is why I think you and I both like the SSL ecosystem now, because you can have an SSL console at your fingertips. Basically, it's virtual
as a plugin,
but you can get your hands on it, and I really like that.
So Rockstars, he's pointing to my UF8 and my UC1.
Yes.
Which is the 8 fader pack, and then the channel strip that basically looks exactly like an SSL console. So those talk directly to the SSL plugins from SSL. Yeah. So it's really handy because the only trick with those is getting a workflow where when you think you're reaching for the EQ on the bass, it's actually the bass channel is reflected on the on the controller, so that you actually are EQing the bass.
Knob per function.
Well, it's just that classic challenge of like you're tweaking a knob in the computer and you're like, oh shit, that was not it wasn't the plugin I thought it was. It was the one that I just set on the vocal or whatever.
Yes.
It's that frustration has been around in DAWs and in Pro Tools for a long time.
Absolutely.
But I just want to make one more comment on what you did with the vocals and the pedals, which is something that happens when you go out and use pedals and go out into the real world. It gave you that ability to perform what you were doing. So like hitting that thing and adjusting hitting the repeat button and then adjusting the feedback knob gives you that like performative aspect of creating a sound. And it's such a great way to work. When I was doing the Bonnaroo studio, I'd always have a delay set up and reverb and stuff. So I'd have like this like basic stable of effects that I could use and put on the voice or put on the guitars or put on the drums or whatever I wanted. And I'd do that at the console. I'd send stuff or I'd grab a fader return and bring it up to hear the effect more. But, you don't have people playing to clicks and stuff like that. So you're not, it was never a set it and forget it delay time. So I'd always have a tap tempo delay.
Oh yeah.
And so I started learning stuff like, while the band's performing, I'm tap tempoing the delay in real time. And as the band speeds up or slows down, I'm resetting it all the time. And then sometimes I would even like double up on it and make short delays. And sometimes I'd go slow and it becomes like a dub mixer.
Yeah.
A thing. And it's something that I've never really recreated in the studio when you're doing automation because it was just so live. It sort of fit with the live performance, and you end up with really cool effects that you just
wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
No.
So
like, I encourage you rock stars to think about your studio that way, and don't be afraid to like maybe, if you've got a delay effect that's going into a mix, even an automated mix, maybe it's smarter to send it out and like, tap it into place the way you want it and have it change up and be more of a performance.
Yeah.
And just print it, you know, as opposed to like trying to, you know, set the delay time or sync it to the tempo of the session.
Right.
It's like, you know, boring.
And that actually brings me to you mentioned, like, is there a quote that is inspired you?
Yeah, tell us your inspiring quote.
That is exactly the mentality is Brian Eno. You know, he said if you had a sign above every studio door saying this studio is a musical instrument, it would make such a different approach to recording. And I've, you know, again, it ties back to how I even got into guitar. Like, that doesn't sound like guitar. What is that? How are they doing that? Using the studio as a tool and an instrument, and not just as a means of capturing a live performance, which also I love going to the studio and just capturing a band as they are. That is completely rewarding too. But if I'm creating, I use the studio as an instrument itself. And I that's what really gets me like going, you know.
Yeah, when you're creating, you're kind of the artist, you know, which you are obviously with the band Glister. And it's funny that you mentioned that difference in thinking, like making it the instrument versus just capturing the band, because now you're a Neotek owner, and Neotek, of course, is the console of choice for Steve Albini up in Chicago, who's you know, quite the idol. Well, and his philosophy is like, I'm capturing the band.
Yes,
you know?
Absolutely.
So it's just an interesting thing to think about when we're making music. Like, which one are we doing?
I'm a massive Albini and electrical audio fan. Greg Norman over there is super nice. He's answered all of my emails when I had a question, because, you know, I'm not going to go back. I spent way too much time talking about the studio stuff, but I did eventually swap the Elan for the Elite, and it had a plethora of problems. So Greg Norman over there really helped me, give me some advice on a few things here and there, and then my awesome tech Jeremy Clark helped me get to the bottom of it too. But yeah, we have the Elite up and running, 40 channels, so I'm never out of room, and everything just, we can get up and running in 10 minutes and get a session going, and that's the dream right there.
That's great.
I know analog consoles are kind of dated at this point, but I still find it faster for me.
Yeah. What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music we are creating to the style that we want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments' Complete Bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and then adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's a great way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. I think that's the key, is finding the system that sounds great and is fast for each of us, whatever our music is. Like if you were doing EDM dance production all day long, you might find that an analog console is like kind of cool, but not.
You're using 2 to 4 channels, and the rest of it's wasting your space.
Oh, I think they're using more than 2 to 4 channels. Oh, on the console.
Yes.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And then they're like, why do I have this giant thing in my studio?
Well, it's fascinating to, like, you know, see what goes into creating all the different kind of sounds that go into music. You know, sometimes it's the old analog stuff, and that's the way to get the right vibe. Sometimes it's, no, just use a digital sample, don't put anything on it. You know?
Right. Yeah.
All right, so Glister was one of the tracks. I think you had that one mixed by Jakir King, right?
That's correct.
So talk about working with Jakir. What were some of the things you learned from him in making music?
Well, I met him in sort of the same way I met you. I met him through my shop originally. The guys at UA connected us. They're like, you guys would be friends. You should be friends. So he came in the shop and introduced himself, and he's just such a kind man. One day, I think I sold him a bass amp, and he invited me to his Franklin studio and hung out there, and he gave me some advice on different aspects of the business side of recording, because I'm still relatively new to this, and I haven't had, in the grand scheme, I haven't had that much work yet, and I'm just getting started. So we just got to talking. Did
he give you any golf tips too?
No, that would be awesome. I haven't golfed that much, but every time I do, it is. I think I get it now. I think I
Maybe
know.
We need to start.
I see why it's fun.
We need to start the East Nashville music makers or engineer or home studios golf tournament. That's what we should do.
Let's do it.
We should do it because we got a golf courses here and like a million, definitely enough people to.
I live out in Old Hickory. There's a golf course right next to me.
That's close enough, right?
Yeah. It's pretty out there. But when the opportunity came for him to mix a song that I had, written and performed and recorded, I wanted to have an all-star crew for this Glister thing. I wanted to do it and do it right. So I had mixed it myself, but then I was like, didn't trust it. I'd recorded it, I'd written it. I wanted someone else's ears on it. I didn't want to do all of the steps because I knew I would be missing something that I was overseeing, because I'd lost perspective. My ears were numb to this song at this point. So I handed it off to him, and, the lesson I learned from him, because, I got the exact session back because he works in Luna too. So I got to see everything he did. And I'm like,
that's wild.
I'm like, God, less is more. Less is more. And on it, and that kind of brings me to my moment of failure. Is that okay?
Yeah. Rockstar, okay. He's pulling out his iPhone ready. He's got his notes ready for the podcast.
You said you might ask what a good moment of failure would be. And it was when, or actually it's my aha moment. I'm sorry. My aha moment or moment of success was when I was first getting into recording and mixing. I reopened a session and forgot that I had disabled all my plugins. And I perked up and I was starting to really dig the mix. And I was like, God, this sounds so much better than I remember. And a few moments later, I realized all the plugins were off, and it was just what I tracked and the balance that I had, with a few minor EQ things, I think. And it taught me, like, okay, I tracked with intention, so why am I reinventing the wheel that I just, you don't need to go overboard in the mixing process, because from that point on, I started making mixes based on necessity first, and then creativity after, instead of my rookie mistake of initially of applying compression and EQ to everything because it sounds better when it's soloed.
Right.
So I do not mix and solo unless I'm trying to figure something out that's an issue. But I saw Jakir's mix of mine. I was like, God, that sounds amazing. And I saw what he did. And I was like, oh, well, that's a cool plugin. I've never seen that one before. I'm going to buy that right now. And, that's a cool plugin. I don't have that. I need to buy that now. So I can recreate the session. But also, he didn't do that much, but God, he took it over the finish line, And I was like, man, okay, I tracked this. Obviously, some of these drums were out of phase because he flipped the phase on these. I was an idiot. Now I'm embarrassed. Things like that. But like just seeing what he did was a huge lesson,
Yeah.
Less is more, is if you track it well.
It's, to me, that reminds me of the challenge of doing a recording session, and you're building a song and you're building a sound in that moment. And when you're in that creative space, it's like you're zoned in on this creation of this thing. And there's a magic that can happen around the rough mix where there's this like excitement to it. And there's a hopefulness to the music, and a possibility is there and everything. And then sometimes you go back to mix, and like you said, it's so easy to pull out all your, engineering tricks. And next thing you know, you've reinvented the music because you're thinking about each individual sound and how it could be something else. You're like, you hear the kick and you're like, oh, that's kind of simple. I know how to make that kick sound huge.
Right.
Or whatever. And you do all this stuff that gets it there. But then you get to the end and you're like, oh shit, the song doesn't make any sense right now. It's like, I did all the stuff, but it just doesn't add up right. Yeah. And I realize it's like, it's what you're saying. It's like, you don't need to reinvent the music that you already invented. So then for me, it became a question of like, right, well, there's still value in a mix template.
Yeah.
Because I can sense that this rough mix needs to go from here to here.
Yeah.
But like what kind of system or what kind of setup is going to not, what's that expression? Throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah,
like,
right.
I don't want to kill what we've already done to start over. I want to
enhance
start from where we left off and go a little further. And so then I just started thinking like, all right, I need a mix template that lets me, kind of build from where I left off. And I'm still trying to figure that out because it's tricky because some moves just change things a lot,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What have you figured out about that so far?
Templates?
Anything yet? Yeah. Like, have you figured out how to pick up from where you left off and add the next layers of icing, but not?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically in Luna, I'll have multiple templates ready to go depending on the mojo that I want the song to have. So in Luna, they have a built-in, every channel can be an API vision channel strip with a Studer on the multi-tracks. And then on the buses, you have the ATRs. And you can do Neve summing or API summing. And so basically you have any console at your fingertips there.
Now, is that, what if your track already had some plugins on it and that was part of the sound?
Right. So if that was already there, I'll leave it or I'll print it. If we decide that's a keeper, if it's still there.
Does Luna do it in such a way that you hold on to the 5 plugins you use to get the sound,
right?
But it also gives you the API console?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're in different slots. So they have slots dedicated for that to where it doesn't interfere with the insert section.
Cool.
Yeah. So basically I have a template, an API template in Luna. I'll have an SSL template for my physical controller, all the SSL channel strip plugins and stuff with the bus compressors and the metering and all that. And then I'll use Harrison Mixbus 32C when I want the Harrison thing. So basically, like I have all these virtual consoles because I'm so analog minded. I like having these different virtual consoles that I can use for whatever song. And if I've created the song in Luna, I'll just keep it in Luna and use the API or the SSL. If I have waveforms from an artist, sometimes I'll pull them into Harrison because I really love how Harrison Mixbus is set up too.
It's cool. I haven't gotten I don't have like the automatic muscle memory for knowing how to work in it and mixing it. But when I've explored it, the sound is very cool.
It is so cool. It definitely has a sound. It sounds different. And the way it's set up like a console is really neat on the mixer window.
So Rockstar's Harrison Mixbus is one that gives you don't have to put an EQ on the channel. You don't have to put a compressor on the channel either. You don't even have to put you don't even have to create buses with tape to print to. It's all built right into it so that when you're mixing,
send whatever to whatever. Yeah. It's great.
It's a cool way to work.
They also have some really overlooked features that I wish more DAWs would, and maybe some do, I just haven't noticed, but there's a really good time-saving feature in Harrison called polarity optimizer or polarity optimization, where you can select a region of all the tracks, just a bridge, or like where everything is playing at the same time, right-click it, and there's a drop-down menu, and you go to polarity optimization, and you can audition, I think, 6 to 8 different. It examines your waveforms and sees what gives you more. You can see the decibel values changed depending on different selections of polarity selections for all of your channels.
Right, which means essentially the phase flip button on each channel.
Yes.
It's trying different combinations to give you a summed output at the mix.
Yeah, it'll automatically flip the phase of all of the channels that need it for you. So it saves you a lot of time. And you can try, because you might not want the one that just makes it the loudest where everything is, as in phase as it can be. Sometimes having a few things a little out of phase is what you want. But you can audition them and pick your favorite instead of going channel to channel and like looking at everything and being like, oh man, is this one, do I need to flip this? Do I need to flip that versus this? What about the whole drum kit? Because it's always the drums. It's a really cool tool that they have.
Yeah, well, drums in particular, because we have so many microphones going at the same time on the same instrument.
Exactly. Making them sound like one instrument.
And impact is affected by phase being correct or incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the correlation of phase between tracks that are just totally different from each other and how the low ends add up together.
Oh, yeah.
In those moments. So that's pretty cool.
That was a great tool.
Yeah. Mixbus and Harrison has a lot of really fascinating plugins. They've got, I forget what they call them. There's ones for toms that like automatically
Tom Gate or something
toms really well. And
is that a Tom Gate or
their AVA? Their AVA plugins will work in Pro Tools as well, and I use the de-essers. Excellent. Multi-band.
I think SSL just acquired Harrison, or they teamed up. Really? They're like one and the same now.
Oh, I didn't hear
that. So
that.
if you go into your SSL 360, you'll see some like Harrison stuff too.
Oh, fascinating. I gotta go check that out.
Yeah, they're a team now.
All right, so let me see. What else do I want to jump over to? Another track in your playlist, Pacific Sunsets. A lot of big reverbs and stuff like that. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about stuff you've learned about keeping all the ambient effects from being big in a session, but not like getting too muddy or too lumpy in the low end and stuff. And also, what about the process for you when you're exploring like, well, if I want to add some reverb or room sounds to drums, how do you go about thinking about that? How do you find the best one? Because obviously there are a lot of reverbs you could put on drums that just are going to suck, or they're not going to fit at all. In fact, I find reverb to be one of the most frustrating plugins of all for that reason. Because it's like, it just feels like there's a million wrong options.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're a band in LA. One of the guys is originally from here. That's how I knew him. I didn't track that stuff. It was tracked somewhere out of state. So I got those tracks in. I had to do a little bit of surgery on some of them. And they're really nice guys. They wanted a very compressed, smashed, and very reverby sound, like very beachy, but like also very aggressive sort of thing. So that was, in retrospect, that was a very big learning curve song. And I'll get to your reverb question in a second, but I wanted to address the quality of that mix. It's something I would do differently now.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us.
It was a stepping stone. Yeah,
we all feel that way about everything we do.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, God, that's kind of an embarrassing mix, but I had to put it on there to show some variety. Also, it's another lesson in giving the artist what they want versus what you think it should be. Mix revisions and if you think something's a little overboard, that's exactly what they want. It's not about you. It's about what they want.
Yeah.
And you put your name on it, but at the end of the day, it's them. So
also, I don't think we're ever satisfied with a mix for the very.
I hear problems with that mix all the time, and I'm like, God, I want to fix it, but it's too late.
Well, for the very simple reason that while we're working on something, we're always trying to look for something to change to improve it.
Right.
And so it's like you literally have to at some point theoretically shut that creative urge off in order to think like, oh, I don't hear anything I'd want to change.
And they say, and especially when they're like, we're happy, we love it. I have to accept that and be like, well, they're happy. My job is done. I'm moving on to the next thing.
Right.
And that's healthy for me because I'll be obsessive,
and also like back to that reverb comment, there's a million ways for us to fuck things up.
Oh yeah.
So like to keep working on it beyond when an artist is happy, there's actually more ways we could screw it up and make them unhappy than probably ways we could make them happier.
Right. For drum reverb though, I usually, I always have a parallel bus for drums or a bus for drum verb specifically, that I will send either the entire drum bus to or selected shells to or room mics or whatever. Just depends on the song. But I honestly only tend these days to use the Ocean Way room, the Sunset Sound room, or the Capitol.
Cool.
Sometimes the Abbey Road stuff.
And the Capitol is the chamber?
Yeah. Like actually actually I started using the Hitsville stuff too. That stuff's killer.
Yeah.
The Motown sort of Hitsville vibe. I love that for bass. But for drums, I'll usually send the whole kit or the most of the kit to, if it's a really dry recording, I'll send it to an emulated room like that.
And the Hitsville one, the bass, you're actually putting a room sound on the bass to give it a little more space, or is it some other feature?
The room or the like the attic that they have. Yeah.
They used to bounce basketballs up there, I think, on the snare beats.
And I do it really minimally, so it's not the bass isn't out of control, but just to make it sound like it's in a space.
Now that I'm saying that out loud, Rockstars, if you have the Hitsville plugin, you could do that. You could actually mic up yourself bouncing a basketball and put that in that room, and and that would probably be the sound of Motown snares.
That's true. Or if you're creating, if you're doing sound design for a basketball game, you know?
Or if you're doing sound design for a basketball. No, in that case, you would use a snare drum.
Yeah, let's just reverse them.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Yeah, another one that you didn't mention, but I got and was messing around with is Fame Studios also.
Oh, I haven't tried that one yet.
They also did an emulation of the room. That stuff's a lot of fun. I mean,
it really is.
I find that with a lot of it, like I'll pull up a bunch of the reverbs that I've got and kind of like enable them all and then just kind of enable, disable them until I'm like, okay, this one feels like it's in this space.
So
it's a challenge because like there's such a sound to some of the classic, especially like you get into the 80s where I feel like that stuff was really invented. I mean, not invented, but like, you know, a processed explosive snare sound comes out of the 80s, I think, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
And the digital reverbs and stuff and looking for plugins that kind of give you that. I also find that when I put a verb there, it helps if I put like maybe like the BF76 or like some kind of compressor plugin after the reverb because a plain reverb sounds too plain.
Right.
Or something, you know? Do you process your drum reverb returns?
Well, luckily, a lot of these room emulations and a lot of reverb plugins have high and low pass filters on them. So I'll use those all the time until it fits in the mix. And I don't just do the room emulations on the drums. I do them on everything. So if things sound disjointed, I can make them sound like one cohesive performance in one space, or, you know, a multitude of spaces that work together. But yeah, sometimes I'll definitely EQ or filter out some reverb to make it fit. I haven't honestly compressed my room verbs very much. I might have to experiment with that, Liz.
I feel like it adds a little bit of a mid-range presence too, which maybe it's just sort of the EQ and the harmonic saturation. But I think just remembering to like never put your paintbrush down. That's sort of like that's what I'm thinking of when we're engineering. It's like every moment is a moment where you maybe could take your paintbrush and adjust the color of what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, with the SSL UC1 controller, I find that helpful because, you know, you hear stories about like Chris Lord-Alge and these SSL users just grabbing knobs and cranking them and stuff. Yeah. When you're just responding to what you're hearing. And so I find myself doing a lot more of that, you know, even like the compression, like maybe I've got the reverb returning and then I've got the SSL channel strip after it on that channel. Yep. And like, do I want to hear more of it? Great. Grab the compressor, compress it a little more. Absolutely. Oh, now I hear more of it. Exactly. Might sound wacky by itself, but in the mix, it pokes through just enough.
And that's all that matters at the end of the day. Yeah. And in addition to the room emulations on drums specifically, do you ever find yourself taking like sometimes I'll take the snare and run that through a separate thing too.
Yeah,
like,
that's mostly I'm doing that.
Yeah,
mostly
exactly.
It's just the snare.
Yep.
I might send some toms there, might send some kick. But
like
I mean,
a
it is
spring or a
spring. Black Spring, the Avid Black Spring plugin is awesome. I did that for an entire dub record.
Oh, nice.
And it really sounded cool. Yeah, but I think, a lot of times too, like what you think, Rockstars, that is the right answer. Like, maybe you try just doing the snare and you're like, why does this still not sound right? And it's like, it doesn't sound like the whole drum kit. Well, yeah, just do a plugin that sounds more like a natural room and put the whole drum kit through it, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Do you find that, are you dealing with a lot of home studio recordings? And do you find that those typically are drums that don't have a useful room mic, and so you have to recreate it at times?
Yeah. You get tracks from all walks of life, different types of people have different access to recording environments. So yeah, absolutely.
And what about your pedal wall? Do you have any verbs that you'll use
on the pedal wall
sometimes for the drums?
Oh yeah, the Ultra Shear is wonderful for that. The Ultra Shear to me it just always reminds me of like a Cocteau Twins or something, like where I can really take drums or anything really and throw it through there and then add a little bit of vibrato just to give it a little extra sauce. But the reverb on there, or the CXM 1978 from Chase Bliss, I don't have the good fortune of having an actual lexicon with the controller on the console, the big white controller. But that pedal is a lexicon in a box, and it has faders on the front of it, just like the controller. So I have that on the pedal wall. I use that every session. That's one of my most used reverbs for sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, we're coming up near the end of the podcast here, but let me jump to some of the closing questions.
Yeah.
I'll hit you up on a few because it sounds like you did your homework, and so I wasn't giving you a fair shake, hitting you with all the usual questions.
I just wanted to be prepared, man.
No, you're great. And I've got all these sort of like standard questions, but I'm at fault because I don't always ask them. I just kind of go off in whatever direction. So
yeah.
What about any favorite hardware tools for the studio? I mean, you talked about pedals, so maybe that's good. And the console. Anything else that comes to mind?
The console.
The console. All right.
The console.
So get a console.
The console is my best friend. You know.
I mean, even I've got a little Mackie mixer there, and don't disparage the cheap consoles, Rockstars, because they have sounds that can be really cool, and you learn how to use them to get a thing that you like in your studio.
Some of my favorite records were mixed on a Mackie 32.8.
I had a lot of fun using that. Mackie boards. The first studio I was at, that's all we had.
You can call them stiff, you can call them sterile. They have a sound and they have a focus. And some of the records that have been made on those are fantastic.
Yeah, and they also have a nice, Mackies in particular have a really nice mid-range with a little bit of attitude and crunch to it.
Yeah, and cranking the preamp and distorting drums and drum machines with those. I mean, that's the Prodigy, That's
nice.
his thing, yeah. And then Fantastic Planet from Failure was, a lot of that album was a Mackie. And their little setup. I think I remember Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, their first record that came out. It was all like ADATs, and a little Mackie mixer. And then the label spent huge amounts of money to take them into a big studio, and they ended up just using the stuff they'd recorded in their living room because it was cooler. It has a vibe. Yeah, absolutely. You can make anything, any mixer, you could, it's going to have a character, and you can make it work if you want to.
How about favorite software tools? You talked about UAD Luna.
Yep.
Any other fun stuff? I mean, it doesn't have to be fave. Just could just be what you're checking out this week.
The SSL ecosystem. I mean, I'm in it.
So you have the UC one as well. Yeah. It talks to Luna, no problem.
Yep.
Now, what about what have you discovered about? Do you have it set up where you have a UF8? So do you have it set up
too?
Do you have it set up where you touch a fader, you touch the bass fader, and now the EQ and the channel strip is reflected?
Yes.
And how do you do that? What's your setup for that? Do you use the 360 software from SSL and look at that while you're mixing, or are you looking at the Luna page?
I toggle between them, but most of the time when I'm getting, the initial balance, the quick mix, like I try to get it done as quick as possible, and then I fine tune from there. I've got the 360 window open, so I basically have a console in front of me because that's how I like to work. That's my brain works best. And so I touch it I can adjust the EQ. I touch the next fader and I'll bank over the next one and I touch it. And it's just quick, lightning fast.
And does
then
the 360, I'm going to ask you all the dumb questions
oh, yeah, you're
for
fine.
this too. So does the 360 on the screen, 360 Rockstars is the name of the SSL software. So it looks like a console in front of you.
Yeah.
Does that also like flip over when you touch the bass fader? Does the bass channel flip onto the screen for you so that you see it up there?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you might have to scroll left and right a little bit if it's not in your window there. And you can adjust all those parameters to make, if you have a huge screen like you do, I'm not lucky enough to have that. You can see the whole entire thing, but my screen's much smaller. So I have to sometimes scroll over.
And then what if you want to go back and listen to the chorus one really quickly? How do you like to do that? Do you do a
use the
locate?
UF8 to go to markers? Yeah.
You just do markers. And you just set
the
them up on
UF8, you can scroll through markers really quick.
I need to start
You can do
that.
if you open that 360 software, you can program your own macros into it very easily, or key commands, and you can do multiple key commands into one macro so that you can execute multiple things in one stroke. So if you want to make markers, you can already have a button set up for like bridge, chorus, verse two, and then just hit one button and make
So this is before your time, I think, but that's what we used to do with the ADATs.
Yeah.
What was it? The BRC1 or something was like the big remote control. I think that was it.
Oh,
the BRC. Cool. And it let you have, verse and bridge and chorus and, pre-named markers, and you drop them in. And then when you wanted to back up, you just did it that way. And it's like, once we went into the Pro Tools world, it's all visual. I'm like looking for, where's the drums and the edit and the chunks and stuff like that. And we really get addicted to that, know, and we don't necessarily need it, especially in the mixing stage where what we're trying to do at mixing is we're trying to think about editing and creating, and we're trying to think about like, what does it sound like? So it is a good strategy to get used to doing that and just listening and, having a console. I mean, there used to be nothing to look at while you were making a record.
Yeah,
it was just, you sit in front of a console, there's the glass into an empty tracking room or something like that, and the speakers, and you're just listening.
And I love that. Yeah. And I wish I could live in those times. Some days when I'm recording and the band's just, all of them are just sitting there on their phones, like not even like in the moment. I'm like, it's a little disheartening sometimes. Yeah,
the moment is only the moment lives as a reproduction in Instagram these days.
Exactly.
So all right, so let's see. Let's talk about other things that you like about UF8 going together with Luna. So, do the faders on your UF8 do you have like colors for tracks or any of that kind of stuff that show up, or is it all...
They had that. They just actually had a software update for the SSL ecosystem, and where it follows the track colors that you have set in your DAW. So it's automatic now.
And so Luna talks right to it that way, and it all talks to each other. Okay, that's pretty hip.
So you don't have to do it. I actually had a question for you, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Do you remember, so I don't know if everyone knows, but Liz is a savior of home studios in Nashville. And when I had the Donaldson studio I talked about earlier, I was really worried that I was going to be shut down because of everything that was going on, where it was being outlawed. I don't know if you remember this, but the 388 that you brought up that I use. Yeah. At SAE, we did an event for this. You threw an event.
Right. Yeah.
Did you remember that I was tracking a jazz band in the analog room for that event? That was me.
Oh, right on, man. Right on.
Yeah. So there was an analog room and a digital room. The digital room, he was showing how to record at home using digital interfaces and digital whatever. And it was like a guy playing guitar in there, and then it was me with a 388 and a Space Echo in the left room, and I was tracking a jazz band, and I put that track that we recorded that day, and just didn't even no post mix or anything. The bass gets a little out of control in a few spots, but that's on the playlist under the extra packet. That's what that is.
That's great, man. That's great.
So that was from the day at SAE where we had the mayor and the governor or whoever come in, and we had a panel. And you put on that event and you saved home studios, man. Thanks.
That's awesome. Dude. Thank you for participating in that too.
That was a great event. And so I put that track on the playlist for you.
That was a lot of fun to go through all that stuff and really rally the entire music community together. And what a strange year to pull that off in 2020 of all times too, Although I think that event we did was earlier than that, right? Wasn't it? It's probably the year before or something.
That was 2019 or 2019. No, it was 2020. It was 2020, I think. Or no, 2019, late 2019. I think it was right before, like right when the pandemic was creeping in.
Right.
Yeah.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. Yeah, Kevin White, who's also been a guest on the podcast, is he runs, I think, the intern program at Kevin, apologies if I'm getting this wrong, over at SAE. And he came over. We did, we did a big session in Labor Day, 2023, and he came and joined the band, and we recorded a bunch of songs.
Kevin's the one who got me, who asked me to do that event. So I love Kevin.
That's great. Okay, so let me keep jumping here. Resource or tip for the business side of doing what we do. What have you learned? What do you want to tell the rock stars? What tip do you think is most useful?
I'm the last person you want to ask. I'm terrible.
How about a terrible business mistake to avoid?
Okay.
I mean, you've got a partnership in a music store. You've done multiple studios.
All of my recording projects have been hearsay, and I have some big projects coming up that I'm excited about that aren't there, they're not on the playlist because they're not in completion yet. But I'm terrible about marketing or advertising myself.
So that's like the hard part, right? Is like do the creative thing, but then once it's released and it's on the internet, the follow through for.
Well, not just getting people in the studio. Like, there's so many studios in Nashville and so many great engineers. Like, people don't really know we exist. I think a lot of people think that it's a private studio, but we just got to be better about putting ourselves out there and like letting people know, hey, we got a lot of calendar time open. Come on in. What
are some things that seem to have worked related to that? Is word of mouth probably?
It's just word of mouth, honestly. I mean, we did one Instagram ad and got 99 spam emails and one real one. So business mistake. I mean,
that's a 1% conversion rate. That's great. Actually industry standard.
That's industry standard.
Yeah.
It's a little disheartening sometimes, like, when you have a big gap between projects. But I shake it off. I have plenty of other things to do with the store and kids, and I do acting as well. So I have a lot of things happening, but I hate do acting. Why did I say it that way?
That's cool.
I do acting. It's a funny way to say it. But it is picking up a little bit, and like I said, there's a lot of great studios to choose from in Nashville. So, have
you tried doing parties or events at the studio and that kind of stuff?
We do a garage sale like every 6 months, and it brings a lot of new people out, and we give them a tour, and then they're like, "Oh, I'll come back," and those have turned into either interns or clients.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm friends with a lot of people who run these pedal companies from the store. So like,
I think pedal demos at your studio would be a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had events in the past before I was at Schematic, actually, where Old Blood Noise would come in, and those are close friends of ours. And we
do private pedal parties.
Yeah, we should do some more stuff.
I'm full of ideas, man.
Yeah, I got to just come to you. I need to ask you business questions because I need more clients, man. Yeah, I don't really have a specific mistake though, except for like, don't seclude yourself. Don't isolate yourself.
Don't do nothing.
Don't do nothing. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, cool. How about organizational stuff? Any tips for, you just wired a console, you're keeping studio stuff together. You've got a crazy pedal display at the music store. I don't know if they're all like plugged in for audio, or if it's more like take the pedal down off the wall when you want to try it.
Yeah.
But what tips have you learned about just organizing a ridiculous amount of stuff in our worlds?
Have everything patched in, ready to go as much as you possibly can, so that all the
time for every session, or just before the session you're going to do next?
I have a universally set up for any and all. That's the great thing about having a console, is you have it set up for pretty much anything, but you tweak for each session, obviously. And if you have a session booked and the artist has some specific requests, you can go ahead and have those patched in. Always go in the day before a session or the morning before they get there, and try to do some, pre-set up to time is money for the artist. You got to respect that. And, that way they feel really good when they're up and running really quickly. But at the same time, taking your time before you hit record, making sure everything sounds good. Yeah. But organization, make sure they bring their own external hard drive. Have a backup.
That's a hard one. I'm always like, hey, you didn't bring a hard drive, did you? No.
Yeah, I always try to tell them ahead of time. And there's a Best Buy right across the street from the studio. So
I find the best way for me to explain to them why they should do that isn't to say, hey, I can't be responsible for your stuff. Is to say, I tell people, I'm like, I do my best to keep your stuff safe, but what happens if I get hit by lightning or everything burns to the ground?
Yep.
Do you want to lose all your record? And then they're like, oh, bing.
Right, exactly.
That's
that light bulb goes off.
For me to bring a hard drive and keep everything safe.
It's happened more than a handful of times where I'll send them, like I said, across the street to Best Buy, and they'll come back with an external. I'll format it for Mac if it's not already. And at the end of every day, if I'm tracking in a whole album or just a single, whatever it might be, at the end of every session, I back everything up. Sessions, the whole session itself, and the multi-tracks to their external. So we have a mirror image of everything that we did that day on both. So we have a safety net a little bit. And I'm so OCD, I feel like that's not enough. I should have like 3 or 4, but then you don't want that many copies of things flying around. But I think that's my biggest thing, is I just have a giant fear of working and the artist like getting everything out of their system and then it being lost in the ether of digital corruption. Are you using
Backblaze yet?
Backblaze?
Yeah.
Oh, please teach me.
That's the secret.
Teach me your ways.
So Backblaze is incredibly affordable. You can have a copy of it. It sort of links to one computer, but most of us in our studio, we've just got a main studio computer. So you can get an account for that. I don't know. Last time I looked, it was like $50 a year, maybe a little more than that. And it backs up everything on the basic plan, everything for 30 days. So if you had, 20 terabytes of hard drives hooked up to the computer and it sees that, it will take a minute, but it'll upload 20 terabytes to the Backblaze account. Basically, whatever hard drives are attached within the last 30 days will all be backed up. And it's very seamless. I never even noticed that it's doing anything. Usually I get to the end of a session, it's like there's nothing left to back up. It already did it.
Wow.
So it's like great, because then, for me, the concern is like, some bad thing happening. Usually it's, something 30 days recent. If it's longer than that, you need some other backup plan, or the projects are still living on your studio computer.
Exactly.
And then if you're moving it off the computer, that's the question of like those external drives. And it's like, all right, well, how many drives makes me sleep at night?
Yeah.
I usually default to 2, like a backup, or no, a master archive drive, and then a backup of that.
Yeah.
But also, and that's only 2. But truthfully, like if I have a drive for that year, like let's say there was an archive drive for 2023 and a backup drive for 2023.
Right.
In 2024, I might have a duplicate copy of what we did on there anyway, because we're still working on it, So in that respect, I think some projects do end up living on more than one drive.
Yeah. That Backblaze, I'll have to look in that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Backblaze is great.
Okay.
It's great.
I'm going to Google
that. They need to be a
as
sponsor on this podcast, because they're like, I don't think they realize just how useful they are to us as studios.
It helped me sleep at night, then I'm all about it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let me go to the closing question.
Yes,
this
sir.
is our hypothetical question. We take the way back studio machine. You go back and find young Brandon, who's scratching his head and saying, how does that guitar sound like that? How did Edge get that guitar part? You find out it was a guitar pedal. No, so you go back and find your younger self and you say, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
That's a great one. I would have to say, you might want to trim this dead space a little bit.
No, this is real. This is real time thinking. Enjoy having a full head of hair while you got it. Is that that's the advice I'm going to go back and give myself?
I mean, I don't know if you saw my crown, but I'm there, my friend. I'm getting there. Yeah, it's that is definitely a thing.
You know why we
wear less hats? You know.
Do you know why we lose hair as audio engineers?
Why?
Because our whole career, somebody's staring a hole in the back of our head, on the backside of the control room while we work.
It's so true. It's so true. Although I do enjoy when they're behind me during the final mix edits, if they want to be there during the final tweaks. That way they said, I sign off on this and there's no more back and forth.
Yep.
But the advice, try less microphones sometimes. I mean, there's probably better advice I can think of, but this is what's hitting me right now. I've had some of my favorite drum recordings with 1, 2, or 3 mics, less phase issues, and just taking my time to place one good mic in one good spot. Man, that's fun. That's like some great experimenting, especially if you like limit yourself to 8 tracks or using a 388, for example, or a smaller mixer. Limitations are your best friend sometimes.
Yeah, indeed. That's good advice. And even what you said about Jakir sending back the mix, and you're like, less was more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, less is more. Maybe that's the overarching lesson sometimes.
Nobody's ever said that before either.
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like every podcast is the same answers probably. So my apologies.
Maybe that's just the definition of good advice.
Yeah, maybe.
How can
sometimes more is more though.
Sometimes more is more. Sometimes more is more. Yeah, that is an advanced.
Depends on the song.
Let the rock stars know how they can find you online, more about you.
Okay.
Whether it's just they want to come make their next hit record with you here in Nashville, or maybe they just want to like talk to you about which pedal to get.
Yeah. So you can find the studio, schematicstudios.com or Schematic Studios on Instagram. You can find the store, eastsidemusicsupply.com or Eastside Music Supply on Instagram.
EMS for short.
EMS for short. A lot of big things coming with EMS, launching here in the next few weeks. Kind of a phase 2. I'll keep it at that. So this is a good time. If you've never heard of the store, this is a good time to pay attention. Years of work is coming to the surface right now. So it's exciting. Johnny Blaine is my nickname and a culmination of my kids' names. So that's me on Instagram or Brandon Highfill Productions. Please reach out. I'd love to record or mix your next project.
Right on, dude. Well, Rockstars, thank you for hanging with us and listening today. Hopefully you got some good takeaways. I mean, it's, all the stuff we talked about is just, it's the stuff we think about every day in the studio.
The fun stuff.
Making records. And Brandon, thanks for hanging with us, dude.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
I'll see you around the studio, dude. And I'm going to come be one of those guys that plays a lot of pedals in your store one day until you're like, Lidge, would you mind turning down a little bit, please?
You can stay as long as you want, I promise.
Right on, dude. Good to see you.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: Lewitt, Grace Design, Adam Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes below, because it's a great great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.